Before we proceed with testimony, the court has denied the motion for mistrial. Juror number 5 has been excused.
I'll ask before testimony begins with the jury to ask about media coverage over the weekend.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, juror number 5 has been excused. You should not speculate or guess about the reasons for that decision. Did any of you see or hear anything about this case in the media? I see no hands. Did anyone try to speak with you about this case other than the participants in this case, including the attorneys and court staff? Has anyone tried to speak with you about the case? I see no hands. Ms. Laviolette, you are still under oath. Do you understand?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
Ms. Wilmot, you may continue.
Thank you, Judge. May I?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Laviolette.
Good morning.
Last week we finished up and we were talking about an email conversation between Chris and Sky Hughes, friends of Mr. Alexander, and Mr. Alexander. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
All right. And that conversation actually spanned, we were specifically talking, I think, about the email from January 29th. Is that right?
Yes.
And did the conversation actually span over a few days?
Yes, it did. It went from the 29th to the 31st.
Okay. And have you reviewed the email on the 31st at some point?
Yes, I did.
All right. Judge, may I approach? Okay. Ms. Laviolette, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 562. If you need to refer to it, let me know. I want to ask you a couple questions about the email conversations from January 29th to the 31st, okay?
Yes.
Can you give us an idea? About why these conversations take place?
Chris and Sky Hughes had a conversation with Jodi Arias regarding the relationship between Jodi Arias and Travis Alexander. When they did that, Jodi then talked to Chris and Sky Hughes, and when she talked to them, they advised her to move on.
Okay. Judge, may we approach?
You may. You may continue.
Ms. Laviolette, based on your review of these emails between the parties, what was your impression as to what Mr. and Mrs. Hughes were discussing with Ms. Arias?
They were discussing the fact that Mr. Alexander has quite a history with women and the way he's treated women in the past, and they were advising her that she may want to move on.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
That she may want to move on and move out of that relationship.
All right. And after this initial conversation that Jodi has with Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, is it your understanding that Jodi then speaks to Mr. Alexander?
Yes, she speaks to Mr. Alexander about the conversation.
All right. And based on that conversation, does Mr. Alexander send an email to his friends Chris and Sky Hughes?
Yes, he does.
All right. And in that email, does that prompt a response then from Chris Hughes individually and then another email from Sky Hughes individually?
Yes.
All right. Can we talk about those then for a second?
Sure.
All right. And I guess specific with Chris Hughes, when he responds, does he, based on your review of his response, what is your impression of that conversation?
That he is basically telling Mr. Alexander
Overruled.
that he is suggesting to Mr. Alexander that he has reason to believe that he mistreats Miss Arias, that he is a flirt, that he has a history of not being particularly good with women, that he's a flirt, that he's the biggest flirt this side of the Mississippi, that he says things to Miss Arias that aren't very kind.
Sustained.
I'm not asking you specifically what he says to what Mr. Alexander might say to Jodi, but is it your impression that Mr. Hughes believed that Mr. Alexander was not saying nice things?
Yes, it was my impression.
And was it your impression that Mr. Hughes believed that Mr. Alexander really wasn't all that interested in Jodi?
Overruled.
Yes.
However, based on the email that Mr. Alexander sends to Chris Hughes, did you get an impression for how Mr. Alexander felt about Jodi at the time?
Yes, I did. There were very positive statements. Mr. Alexander expressed interest.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Mr. Alexander, what?
Expressed interest.
Okay.
That being with Miss Arias was like winning the wife lotto. That she was a good person, a fantastic, amazing woman. And
so talking about your impressions, was it something that Mr. Alexander seemed to view Jodi at the time very favorably?
yes, yes, he did.
And so because of this information, did Mr. Hughes, is it apparent from Mr. Hughes' email that he was, that he didn't know that?
Yes.
Overruled.
Based
Yes.
on, yes, okay.
Yes.
And is that from based on your reading of Mr. Hughes' email?
That's based on my reading of Mr. Hughes' email.
Okay. And can we talk about the email from Sky Hughes, Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
And that's an email that was sent also in response to what Mr. Alexander responded, right? So is that right?
Yes.
And if you're going to look at the exhibit, just let us know.
I'm going to look at the exhibit.
Do you need to do that to refresh your recollection?
Well, I'm pretty clear on it, but I just want to really, yes, I want to recollect.
Okay. Just let me know when you're finished.
Okay. Okay.
All right. And based on your reading of the email from Sky Hughes back to Mr. Alexander, what was your impression of that email?
My impression was that she had serious concerns about Mr. Alexander and Miss Arias's relationship, that she was concerned about his history and how he treated her, that she was also apologetic and felt that maybe she overstepped when she talked to Jodi, but that she talked a lot about his history and why she believed the things she did.
Why she believed what?
Why she believed that Mr. Alexander was not someone who would get involved deeply with Miss Arias and his history of how he was with women.
Okay. And did Mr. Alexander talk about how he had treated another woman in his email?
Yes, he talked about a woman by the name.
Overall,
He talked about a woman by the name of Brandy. He said, with Brandy, I'm certain.
Give us your impression of based on what Mr. Alexander said about how he treated this other woman. What did you get from it?
That he treated her badly, but that he didn't feel badly about it.
overruled. Next question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the answer. He treated her badly.
He treated her badly, but he didn't feel badly about having treated her badly because he didn't.
Okay. Was it something? And is this something that the Hugheses took into account, his past behavior?
Yes, they did.
All right. And between the emails of Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, how did they speak of Jodi?
They spoke very favorably of Jodi.
And was there anything else about your impressions with regard to the email from Sky Hughes?
Not in particular.
All right. And to clarify, based on your reading of this case and your understanding, do you know who Chris and Sky Hughes are?
Yes, they were friends of Travis's, apparently very close friends.
Sustained.
Based on your reading of the emails and what Mr. and Mrs. Hughes say, are you aware of how they know Mr. Alexander?
They know Mr. Alexander.
With a question, yes or no?
Yes, it is a yes or no question.
Yes.
Are you aware? Okay.
Yes.
Then, and how is that?
They are connected with him.
Approach. Continue.
Ms. Laviolette, when in looking at relationships and progressions of relationships and ultimately making opinions about relationships, does it matter do you gather information from different sources?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And when you're looking at getting this information from different sources, does it matter to you who the sources are, or do you just take it from anybody?
It matters to me who the sources are.
And so if the sources are somebody who is close to a person that you're considering in a relationship, does that make a difference to you?
It does, because they tend to know that person a little better.
Okay. And so based on that information and your reading of the emails, do you have an understanding of whether or not the Hugheses are considered close friends to Mr. Alexander?
Yes, they are.
All right. And did they know him for a while?
They knew him for 5 years.
And that's prior to these emails?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. All right. I wanted to talk to you next about an email from Ms. Arias to Mr. Alexander on February 7th of 2007, okay?
Yes.
So this is, I guess this would be just 7 days or so after the email conversation occurs between Chris Hughes, Sky Hughes, and Mr. Alexander. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
All right. Judge, may I approach?
Yes.
All right, I'm handing you an exhibit what's remarkably exhibit 563. If you need to look at it, let me know. Okay?
Yes.
All right. In this, in your review of this case, did you review emails with regard from between Ms. Arias and Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I did.
And did those emails, did some of them give you an idea about the type of relationship they had?
Yes, they do.
And is there an email on February 7th of 2007 from Ms. Arias?
Yes, there is.
And it goes to Mr. Alexander?
Yes, it does.
And is there anything about that email that was important to you?
Yes, in this email,
Yes or no?
Sustained.
yes,
I'm just,
yes.
okay. My next question is, what was important?
It was important because Ms. Arias apparently had a talk with Mr. Alexander, and he addressed her concerns, the concerns that she had after talking to the Hughes. And because of that, she said she felt better about the relationship.
Overruled. Yes.
She felt better about the relationship and was grateful that he addressed all her concerns, and she had more faith in their relationship after having a discussion with Mr. Alexander.
All right. And what about that is important to you?
Well, once again, the coming together, the doubts, the feeling bad, the pattern that's about having episodes, feeling bad, and then having sort of a loving respite, a period where things are cleared up and people bond and they get close together again. And so that's happening in this relationship.
All right. And so after hearing bad things about Mr. Alexander from Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, then based on this email, things are cleared up between the two of them.
Yes.
All right. And does that give Jodi any hope then for their relationship?
Sure. I mean, part of what happens when people come together after an argument, any argument, is that most people, when it's resolved or they feel that there's resolution, they get close and they feel connected again, and there's a trust there, and there's a hope about the relationship, and a good feeling that the relationship is proceeding in a good way.
All right. And is hopefulness, is that one of the things we talked about last week with regard to relationships and women who might stay in a battered relationship?
Yes, we talked about learned hopefulness, which is the whole notion that between episodes of distress or between episodes that could be seen as abusive, there's healing. And during that healing, people get to recover, they get to have faith, they get to believe that there's going to be change, and they usually have some evidence that that's true. And the evidence in this case is that he addresses all her concerns, and she feels good about it.
All right. And just so we're clear, we're not saying that there was any particular incident of abuse January 29th to the 31st.
No, we're not.
Okay. And you had also mentioned that it could be just distressing issues.
Yes,
Okay. Is that what you were talking about?
yes,
Okay. On February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, is that right?
yes,
All right. On Valentine's Day, part of the work that you've done on this case is speaking with Jodi, right?
yes, it is.
Okay. And in speaking with Jodi, did you learn whether or not Mr. Alexander got her Valentine's present?
Yes, he did.
And do you remember what it was that she got?
She got a pair of Spider-Man underpants.
All right. And was that sent to her in the mail?
I don't know.
Okay. Did she also get a T-shirt with the name Travis Alexander's?
Yes, she did.
And, I'm sorry, or Travis's?
Travis's.
Okay.
It was either Travis Alexander's or Travis's.
Okay. The important part, though, is did it have an apostrophe S, meaning it was in a...
By counsel, the important part.
Sustained rephrase.
Did it have a apostrophe?
Yes, it did.
And apostrophes are used for what?
Usually possessive.
Okay. And did she also get a little pair of like boy shorts or some kind of underwear?
Spider-Man underwear.
Well, did she also get underwear that had the name Travis written on the back?
I'm unaware of that.
Oh, okay. All right. The T-shirt, with the T-shirt, that was something that she didn't make it, right?
No, she did not.
Okay. All right. So then let's move to February 18th. And this is February 18th of 2007. At this time, do you know what the status of the relationship is between Jodi and Travis, what they are saying it is?
They're saying that they're an official couple at that point.
Okay. And if they're an official couple, are they calling each other boyfriend and girlfriend?
No, they're not calling each other girlfriend and boyfriend.
All right. And do you know why?
Mr. Alexander did not want them to be designated as girlfriend and boyfriend, but they were a couple.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what's already in evidence is Exhibit 438. You see the top of that, there's a subject, and it says FW. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you know what that means in email language?
I don't know email language very well,
Okay.
or hardly at all.
All right. You don't email very much, is that right?
That would be accurate.
Okay. And are you aware that FW means forward?
Yes, I am aware that means forward.
Okay. And the subject line is our friendship, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you can see who is it from?
It's from Jodi Arias,
And it's dated?
February 18th.
And it's written to?
Travis Alexander.
Okay. So when we say written to, because this is a forward, it's forwarded to Travis. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then we have what looks to be in that section there, the original. Do you see that from Jodi Arias?
Yes.
And the subject is the same, right?
Yes.
And the same date, February 18th?
Yes.
All right, and let's look at the time. So it looks like this was sent at 22:29. Do you know military time?
Yes, it's 10:29.
Okay, PM?
Yes.
All right, and then we can see that it was forwarded 22:58, which is 10:58, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so just about a half hour later, is that right?
Yes.
All right, and this is an email to, well, have you reviewed this email before?
Yes, I've reviewed the email.
All right, and it was written to a person named Abe, is that right?
Yes.
Is there, well, actually, it's in evidence. So let's talk about this for a second. The context of the email, the subject itself, do you remember as a whole, can you give us as a whole what the email is about?
The email's really about Miss Arias, Jodi, contacting a man that she had gone out with a couple of times and telling him that she was not going to be going out with him anymore, that they needed to rethink their friendship, and that she, although she was not officially Travis Alexander's girlfriend, that she started thinking about how Travis would think about her having this time with another man, and that she didn't think it was a good idea, and that she wanted to curtail their relationship.
All right. And let's go to, let's see. You see here where it says, although I'm not married?
Yes.
All right. Can you read that sentence for us?
Although I'm not married and I'm not Travis's girlfriend, from now going forward, I feel that you and I should keep a friendly distance.
All right. And does she talk about how that they shouldn't hug anymore?
Yes,
And,
because that could be misconstrued.
okay. And does she talk about, at the bottom here, can you read us that paragraph? You already know.
You already know that I'm seeing Travis. I've never divulged many details about our relationship simply because I consider certain details to be sacred and private and should be kept between him and I anyway.
All right. And keep going.
I know I've told you that we are not in a committed relationship, but regardless of our status, I care so deeply about him. I often ask myself, how would Travis feel about this? Or how I would feel if Travis were doing what I'm doing right now with someone else. In fact, this reasoning has been a compelling force behind all my actions, decisions, and conduct as of late.
All right. So with regard to this email and knowing that it was forwarded to Mr. Alexander, is this important to you at all in your review of their relationship?
It is.
Why is that?
Well, Jodi is, for one thing, looking at how Travis feels, and that's very important to her. She has empathy and thinking about how Mr. Alexander might feel about her relationship. She's also forwarding the information as if she needs proof to Mr. Alexander that she's ended that relationship, which I find a little unusual, since he has indicated that it's okay for her to date other people.
All right. And even though he's indicated that it's okay for her to date other people, and you have that information from the emails between the Hugheses and Mr. Alexander, is that right?
Yes.
And also from those emails, are you also aware that Mr. Alexander, that they felt that Mr. Alexander would guilt Jodi if she did see somebody else?
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
And in fact, in those emails, does Mr. Alexander address two people that Jodi had gone on a date with?
Yes.
And was there any approval from Mr. Alexander?
No, in fact, Mr. Alexander said that the one man...
Sustained.
What was your impression of what Mr. Alexander thought?
that one of the men was a non-believer and not really worthy, and that the other man was a 45-year-old bald Jew, and that they weren't good candidates for dating Miss Arias, for dating Jodi.
And based on those email conversations, did the Hugheses believe that Miss Arias would feel guilty about going out with anybody else?
Sustained.
Did you get an impression of that, of how Miss Arias would feel or was made to feel if she would see anybody else?
Sustained.
May we approach?
may continue.
Ms. Laviolette, did you speak to Ms. Arias about this letter that she had to write to Mr. Abdahadi?
Yes, I did.
All right, and did she tell you that she had to write it?
She told me that
Overruled.
yes, she told me that she felt that she needed to write it.
Okay, and why is that?
Because Mr. Alexander was not feeling comfortable with that relationship, and because, as Ms. Hughes indicated, he was jealous.
Overruled.
And so, as Ms. Hughes indicated, that he was jealous?
That the only part of his reply that she laughed at was when he said he wasn't jealous.
Okay, so based on what Ms. Arias told you, as well as what you've read in their emails, do you see a connection between how the Hugheses believed that Mr. Alexander was kind of telling her a double standard: go and date other people, but if you do, he guilts her. Is that one of the things they said?
Yes,
Okay.
they believed that he was jealous and that he didn't really mean for her to date other people.
All right. And then we see just a few weeks later, Miss Arias writing a letter to a friend who basically terminating that relationship. Is that what this letter is to Abe?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is that important to you in the scheme of a relationship?
It's important to me because jealousy is often a precursor to controlling behavior. Because when people feel jealous and insecure, they oftentimes try or attempt to control other people. And it's not that jealousy isn't a normal human emotion, it's the degree that jealousy occurs that makes the difference.
All right. I want to move on to May of 2007.
Yes.
In speaking with Miss Arias, did she tell you whether or not, did she tell you about a time when Mr. Alexander woke her up by having vaginal sex with her?
Yes, she did.
All right, and when was that, approximately?
It was approximately May 10th, sometime around that time. Early May.
Early May.
Early May of 2007.
All right, and we know that. Well, what do you know about the incident? Why don't you tell us that?
What Miss Arias, what Jodi relayed to me was that she was woken up in the middle of the night with Mr. Alexander penetrating her, and then she stopped him because she believed that was a sin, and she believed she needed to stop that behavior, that was the ultimate sin in regard to chastity in the Mormon faith, and that it was against her religion, and she didn't want to go through with having vaginal sex. And at that time, that Mr. Alexander then pushed her head down, and she had oral sex with him.
All right. Now, up until May of 2007, are you aware whether or not they've already had sexual contact? Maybe not vaginal intercourse, but had they already had sexual contact?
They've had oral sex and anal sex.
Okay. And so this vaginal sex, was this something you said that violated the laws of chastity?
Yes.
And was that according to what Miss Arias knew at the time?
That was according to what Miss Arias knew. That was according to what Mr. Alexander told Miss Arias.
Sustained.
How did Miss Arias know about the law of chastity?
She was informed about doctrine in the Mormon Church by Mr. Alexander. He was basically her.
The question she answered.
I'm sorry, part of your
She
objection.
answered the question as to how she knew.
Judge, this is direct.
Sustained, ask another question.
All right. What else were you going to say?
I was going to say that Mr. Alexander was her spiritual guide and really taught her the doctrine in the Mormon Church, the Gospels in the Mormon Church, and was very much a person that she looked up to in regard to his knowledge of the Gospels and his knowledge of Mormon Mormon faith and his position in the Mormon Church.
All right. And with regard to the vaginal sex in May, what does that speak to? But is that important to you, the fact that she was able to say no?
It was important, yes, it was important to me.
Okay, why is that?
Because she was able to set a limit. She still had boundaries, and the boundaries were about stopping him at a place that she believed was a real violation of the law of chastity. So she was able to say, no, I can't do this at that time.
Okay. And and ultimately she still ended up performing some type of she performed oral sex with Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes, she did.
But that was something, according to her knowledge, based on what Mr. Alexander told her, was okay. Is that right?
Sustained.
Was it okay, based on her knowledge, to perform oral sex to Mr. Alexander?
It was a lesser sin to perform oral sex.
All right. And is that what Mr. Alexander had told her?
Yes, it was.
All right. Judge, this is probably a good time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take the noon recess at this time. Counsel, please approach. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask that you be especially careful about avoiding contact with anyone, having any media contact, allowing anyone to speak with you today during the noon recess. I'm going to ask security to escort you out a different door for purposes of the lunch hour, and that you convene in a different location. We'll tell you where that will be, just so that you can avoid the front of the court building. Please remember the admonition. Go back to the jury room and wait until someone comes to escort you out for the lunch hour. You are excused. We'll see you back at 1:25. Thank you. The record will show the jury has left the courtroom. Ms. Laviolette, you may step down. We are at recess until 1:30. Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, Ms. Laviolette, we left off talking in May of 2007. I wanted to move forward to June of 2007.
All right?
All right. And at the time of, in the beginning of June of 2007, what's your understanding with regard to the relationship between Mr. Alexander and Jodi?
That relationship was still continuing and that they were still a couple.
All right. Let's talk about journal entry. And in part of your review of the case, did you look through Jodi's journals that she kept?
Yes, I did.
And specifically, did you look through the journals that she was keeping while she was dating Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I did.
And in one of those journals, did you look at one dated from June 5th of 2007?
I'm sure I did.
All right. Judge, may I approach? I'm hanging with the record at 564. Is that the article, or I'm sorry, not the article, but the journal from Ms. Arias's diary from June 5th of 2007?
Yes, yes, it is.
Do you need to review that prior to me asking you questions about it?
I think I'm fine with that.
You're good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So on June 5th, 2007, is there, after your review of this journal writing, what is your impression with regard to what Ms. Arias is writing about?
She's writing about her experience of Mr. Alexander and a testimony that he gave regarding eternal families, regarding his own father, and her just her admiration of him and what it meant to her to have someone who was so strong and so usually tough and jovial, to be so in touch with his heart, and that it touched her deeply, and that she realized one of the reasons that she was so deeply in love with him.
And does she talk about the two of them in a spiritual sense?
Yes, she talks about them, about feeling very close to him spiritually, that this touched her a lot, and then once again connected them in a spiritual way.
Okay. As part of this journal article, as part of this journal writing, does she also have any misgivings?
She says, well,
Your impressions.
my impressions are that she's begun to feel suspicious. There are things that have been happening. He's been flirtatious with women in front of her. She hasn't been introduced sometimes when they go out. And so there's this feeling that maybe something's going on that she's not aware of, that she's suspicious.
Okay. Does she speak to whether or not Mr. Alexander does anything to assuage her of those feelings?
Yes, that they talk and...
About a question.
Sustained.
What does it say what are your impressions with regard to Mr. Alexander making her feel better?
That they both convey to each other how lucky they are to be with each other, that she feels lucky to be with him, and he reiterates to her how lucky he feels to be with her.
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
That he feels very lucky to be with her, and she thinks that's really great.
All right. Is there anything else that was... Well, I guess let me ask you this. What's significant to you about this particular writing?
Well, once again, it's a time where she's feeling insecure and she's reassured, and they're bonded over the spirituality, which I think is really significant in this case, that they're both very attached to their faith, and she's attached to his role in that faith. So anytime that he does something that's impressive to her, that's about that spirituality, it connects them, as it would, I think, most anybody.
All right. Let's talk about June 10th. There's another journal writing from June 10th. Judge, may I approach? I'm handing you what's been marked as Exhibit 566. That's the June 10th journal writing. Let me know if you'd like to review it first.
Right.
Okay, do you recall that journal writing?
Yes, I do.
All right, why don't you tell us, based on your impressions of reading through that journal, this particular entry, what's your impression of what is it about?
It's about a time that they go out for karaoke, and Miss Arias sings My Guy for Mr. Alexander, and how much he appreciates it, and how he praises her for her singing ability.
Just tell us your impressions of what it's about.
It's about her singing ability and her using that singing ability to make an impression on Mr. Alexander, and that it does.
All right, and is this something where, is she writing about how good she feels with him?
Yes, about how special he makes her.
Sustained.
Because why?
Because he makes her,
Overruled.
because he makes her feel very special. And throughout this relationship, it's one of the things that she continues to say is that he has made her feel more special than anybody in her life. And this is one more example of how he makes her feel special.
And what's significant about this writing for you?
I think pretty much what I just said was that feeling special for any of us, I think, is a really important thing. I think we get in relationship to feel special to somebody. And so feeling special is a connecting place in relationship.
Is that something that further bonds them together?
Yes.
And specifically with regard to Miss Arias, does it further bond her to Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
All right, I want to talk to you about, let's see, in June. At some point in June, does Miss Arias find out that Mr. Alexander was being unfaithful to her?
Yes, she does.
All right, and did you speak with Miss Arias about this?
Yes, I did.
What is it that you learned?
I learned that Miss Arias became suspicious, and she was confessing that she looked at his text messages. And when she looked at his text messages, she found numerous text messages that were sexual in content before they were dating and after they were dating, that about setting up future rendezvous with other women, and about previous rendezvous with other women, and that it was crushing to her, and that they were planning a trip, and she didn't want that to ruin the trip. So she didn't bring it up right away. In addition to that she texted one of the women that was on this, or in this group, and texted that person and said, Jodi cuddling with Travis, something to that regard. And she said she was kind of embarrassed that she had done that, but she did that sort of spontaneously.
And does she speak, we were just talking about one of her journal from June 5th to 2007, so just in the very beginning of June, is that where she's writing about her suspicions?
Yes.
And at some point after that, is that when she confirms it by looking at his text messages?
Yes, she does.
What does she do? Does she confront him right away?
No, she doesn't. She wants to have this trip. She wants to enjoy the trip, and she feels like that's really going to throw a monkey wrench into it, basically. And so she waits until after the trip to confront him.
Is there something special about trips between the two of them? Is there something that does something for the relationship when they go on trips?
They seem to do trips really well. They both tend to have a sense of adventure, it seems like. They both try new things. They love seeing new places, and it really connects them. So I think it's a strong point in their relationship.
So she decides to go forward with this trip, even though she knows about these text messages.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about some of that then.
He's already given that to me.
I gave you June 24th?
Yes.
Oh, all right. What's the exhibit number on there?
What's
oh,
that?
The green tag.
566.
Okay. So, all right. Okay, but we haven't talked about it. So June 24th, she writes an article, a journal entry, and tell us what your impression is of that journal entry.
She's talking about the law of attraction.
All right.
And about that her impression of God is that.
Sustained.
Are these your impressions?
Yes,
Okay. May she continue, Judge?
that Heavenly Father wants her.
No, I'd object.
Approach, please.
Lila, you were telling us that the subject matter of this particular journal was about the law of attraction and what else?
Basically, it was about the law of attraction and what that means to Miss Arias, to Jodi, that if you want good things to come into your life, you have to think good things, you have to imagine good things, and that you really can't think about bad things because that creates exactly what you don't want. So her belief is that the law of attraction means that she has to focus on what's good and what's positive, even if it means ignoring what's going on behind her back, which is hard for her to do because she knows that things are happening. And in order to focus on the positive, she has to ignore those things.
And is she talking about that, about the difficulty of ignoring things that are going on behind her back?
Yes.
And you said the law of attraction. Are you actually familiar with the law of attraction?
Yes, I am.
What do you know about it?
The law of attraction.
Sustained.
How do you know about the law of attraction?
I watched The Secret and I watched another documentary film about the law of attraction.
Okay, so based on those two documentary films that you've watched with regard to the law of attraction, can you tell us what it is that you know?
The law of attraction basically states that if the energy you put out is what you bring in. So if you put out a lot of good energy, you bring good energy back to yourself. And it also implies that you have to go in the direction of that energy. So if you're thinking good thoughts, you also have to act on those good thoughts. And for some folks, it's clearly about thinking. If they think the right thing, then good things will happen. And I find that sort of thinking to an extreme in regard to the law of attraction.
All right. With regard to this journal entry, what is the significance to you about the way that Jodi speaks of the law of attraction and having to ignore things going on behind her back?
It actually negates, I think, in some ways that she's just a human being, because what it's basically, the way she's kind of taking it is that she doesn't have to be affected by what's going on around her, as if she just thinks right and if she just focuses on what's positive, then it'll turn out okay anyway. And so it almost negates the impact of one human being on another.
Does it account for what other human beings are doing to the person who's thinking of the law of attraction?
It pretty much says that you can create what you think, what you feel, what you believe, what you write down, that energy is going to change things.
And so if at the time Jodi is aware that Mr. Alexander is being unfaithful to her, pursuant to the law of attraction, does she need to ignore that?
She needs to focus on the outcome, what she wants to have happen at the end, as opposed to what's happening right now. So what's my picture kind of for the future as opposed to what's happening right now?
All right. And in your experience in dealing with relationships and abusive relationships, can this be a problem?
Oh, yeah, it can be a real problem, because basically you can't change somebody else unless they're agreeing with you. So if somebody wants to change, that's really helpful. If they don't want to change, I have yet to find the person that can change them.
All right. Just by positive thinking.
Right.
Now, during this time in June, were they on a trip together?
Yes.
And during this trip together, what happens with their relationship while they're on a trip together?
They get closer. They enjoy themselves. It's a bonding experience. It's just the two of them together. So it's connecting.
Okay. Now, at the end of June, what happens with their relationship?
At the end of June, Miss Arias, Jodi brings up what she's found, and they allegedly break up.
Well, let me stop you. Why do you say allegedly? Well, why do you say allegedly?
Because they continue to be together in action. And Mr. Alexander apologizes and gives her gifts. And so despite the fact that they're broken up, they really continue to see each other. It's just more secretive now.
And did the contact there? Did they continue to have contact, even though if they break up at the end of June? At the end of June, are they continuing to have contact?
Yes, they're continuing.
Sustained?
Did you speak to Jodi about this?
Yes.
And did she talk to you about when she broke up with Mr. Alexander?
Yes, at the end of June.
Okay. And did she talk to you about whether or not he continued to have contact with her, even though she broke up with him?
Yes, they continued to have regular contact.
And was that, did she talk to you about whether or not it was Mr. Alexander who continued the contact?
She said that Mr. Alexander continued to call her.
Hearsay.
What, I'm sorry, what did you say?
That Mr. Alexander continued to call her and that they continued to have contact.
All right. And that was even the day after they broke up?
I believe it was.
I'm sorry, what?
I believe it was.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about into July of 2007. So we know, okay, allegedly they've broken up. Is there a point where Miss Arias moves? Well, and let me stop you. From the time they met, to the time, the end of June, were they living in separate cities?
Yes, they were living in separate states.
Okay. Oh, in separate states, right. And after they broke up, is there a time where, what was Mr. Alexander doing after she breaks up with him as far as the relationship was concerned?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, was Mr. Alexander attempting to reestablish the relationship?
They were in contact with each other.
Okay. And so within contact with each other, are you aware of whether or not Miss Arias ended up moving?
She moved to Mesa in, I believe, July
Okay. Of 2007?
in 2007.
All right. And so once she moves to Mesa in 2007, now they're not living together, right?
No, they're not.
So now that would make them in the same city?
Yes.
All right. This may approach. Can you exhibit 567? What's marked as 567? That's a journal entry from July 25th of 2007 from Miss Arias. Do you need to review that?
Yes.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
All right. What is your impression after reviewing the email? And obviously you've reviewed it before today, right?
Yes, I have.
Okay. What is your impression with regard to the subject matter of the journal entry on July 25th of 2007?
It has to do with trust.
Okay.
And basically that Miss Arias, Jodi, is saying,
You're not about to tell us what she's exactly saying, right?
no,
Okay. Is this your impression?
this is my impression,
Okay. May she continue, Judge? Yes.
that they violate each other's trust. Her violation is in looking at his text messages. His violation is in continuing to see other women. She says,
Do you want to use another word than says?
I need a thesaurus, I think. I keep saying say, and I know I'm not supposed to say. Okay, my impression basically is that there's a lack of trust and a lack of any foundation for trust, and that Mr. Alexander's providing no reason for her to trust in this situation, and that she basically shouldn't have to be worried that someone she loves is acting in a way that is distressful.
Does she talk about how she feels about herself?
Yeah, she basically feels stupid and really blaming herself for being blind and stupid in this situation.
All right. This is the end of July, so this is right when she moves to Mesa. Is that about right?
I'm not sure exactly when in July she moves, but it's toward that time, sure.
Okay. What is significant to you about this particular journal entry?
The significance for me is that she's feeling very insecure about the relationship, but she isn't out of it. She's still in it. And that she feels like she can end this violation, that she can end her part of it by not checking his emails, or his texts, but she's not sure that he can provide that comfort for her. And so there's a lot of self-blame in this, and I think that's really important, that she's blaming herself for staying in the relationship. And you see that type of self-blame a lot when you're working with victims of domestic violence, where they really start to wonder what's wrong with them that they're sticking with it.
So do you mean that they're blaming themselves for the problems?
They're blaming themselves for the problem. They're blaming themselves for not doing anything about the problem.
Does that tie in at all to her belief in the law of attraction?
Yes, I think the law of attraction sort of collides with the self-blame. It's much easier to blame yourself if you think you can change things by the way you think and the way you write in your journal and the way you feel.
Okay. Back when they first met, that weekend that they met in Las Vegas. You talked about all the things that Jodi learned about Mr. Alexander just in that weekend, about who he was in the community, that type of thing. And can you tell us what were some of the things that she learned that weekend about him, about what the community would think of him?
She learned that he was a priesthood holder in the Mormon church, which stresses family values, and she was very impressed by that. She learned that he was a major player in PPL, the organization that he worked for, and that he was one of the people invited to the executive director's banquet. So there was an appearance of financial stability with that. She learned that he was persistent, and she liked that.
All right. And with regard to the financial stability, is that something that, in your review of the case, is that something that Mr. Alexander put forth to other people, his financial success?
Yes, he did.
And is that how he portrayed himself to other people?
Yes, he did.
All right. Judge, may I approach? I'm handing you what's been marked as Exhibit 568. Is that an email?
Yes, it is.
And when is it dated?
It's dated July 27th
Of 2000.
of 2007.
All right. And who's it from?
It's from Sky Hughes.
And who's it to?
It's to Mr. Alexander.
And what is your impression of the subject matter of this particular email?
Her apology for not being able to loan him $4,000.
All right. And is she still able to loan him some money?
Yes, she's able to.
Hearsay.
Sustained.
Is she, based on your impressions of the email, is she able to give him some money?
Objection, relevance, hearsay.
Sustained.
Ms. Laviolette, based on your review of this case and other emails and text messages, are you aware of Mr. Alexander asking other people for money?
Objection, Roberts.
Overruled. You may answer yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. I want to talk to you about a baseball game. Did Miss Arias ever talk to you about when she went to a baseball game in July of 2007?
Yes, she did.
And can you tell us about that?
Miss Arias went with her friends.
Hearsay.
Sustained.
May we approach?
You may continue.
All right, we were talking about a baseball game that you spoke to Miss Arias about. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. So could you tell us what you know about this baseball game after speaking with Miss Arias?
She attended, or she was going to attend a game with some of her friends, and it happened to be on the night of Mr. Alexander's birthday. He called her and basically asked her to.
Hearsay.
Sustained.
After he calls her, does he have a conversation with Miss Arias?
Yes, he does.
All right. And is she on the way to the game, or is she at the game? Do you know?
They're walking toward the D-back stadium.
Okay. And when after she has this conversation, what is the subject matter of the conversation?
The subject matter is why she hasn't planned anything to do with,
Overruled.
why she hasn't basically planned to spend time with him on his birthday, and that he would like that to happen.
Hearsay speculation.
Overruled. That answer may stand. Next question.
All right. And to your knowledge, based on what Miss Arias tells you, had they made any prior plans for his birthday?
No, they had not.
And was she in planning to attend the Diamondbacks game?
Yes, she was.
All right, and she gets this phone call from Mr. Alexander, and is he guilting her?
Yes.
After this conversation, what does Miss Arias do?
Miss Arias leaves, but prior to leaving, she asked Mr. Alexander to come pick her up from the game since he wants her to spend time with him. He refuses, and her friend, Rachel, takes her back to Mr. Alexander's house where she makes him a cake for his birthday, and they spend the evening together.
All right, so her friend Rachel takes her all the way back to Mesa where Mr. Alexander lives?
Yes,
From the Diamondback Stadium?
yes,
And then she spends the evening with Mr. Alexander for his birthday?
yes.
All right. What about this, if anything, is significant to you?
Well, the use of guilt, the use of control to sort of manipulate her into doing what he wants her to do. The fact that they don't have plans, that they allegedly don't have a relationship, aren't an official couple, but are still behaving, and he's still making the demands that someone would make on somebody that they're in a relationship with.
Testimony demands.
Is that how you review? You used the word demands. Is that how you took the information from Miss Arias that Mr. Alexander was making demands upon her?
I think not you better be here, but more subtle demands.
Okay. And we talked about subtlety in the beginning when you first testified about, I know we talked about subtlety when it comes to emotional abuse. And now we're talking about manipulation, the use of guilt and manipulation. Is this something that you would consider as subtle?
It is subtle.
Okay.
It's not as direct.
All right. What about the fact that it's Miss Arias who ultimately decides to go back to spend the night with or to spend the evening with Mr. Alexander? I mean, isn't that her fault?
Well, it would be her choice, but there's a real power difference in this relationship. And the power difference is that she apparently cares more than he does at this point. And I think, I don't know anyone who hasn't been in a relationship where they cared more than somebody else at one point in their lives. And when that happens, there is a real power difference that people with less power tend to try to do whatever they can to bring that relationship together. And
Let me stop you there for a second. Sorry.
Okay.
But when you talk about people with less power, are you referring to Jodi then?
I am.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That Jodi cares at this point more than Mr. Alexander. And so there's a real...
Alexander's state of mind.
Sustained.
Is this are you talking about based on your expert opinion with regard to seeing numerous couples, thousands of people over the years that you've practiced? Have you seen power differentials in that time?
I have, and I have lots of friends.
Okay.
I have lots of people that I know.
All right. And when you talk about power differentials, why is that important when we're looking at a progression of a relationship to decide whether or not it ultimately ends up to be abusive?
Because abusive relationships ultimately become unbalanced in power. They may not start out that way. They may start out that way, but they ultimately come to a place where one person has more power than the other person.
All right. Do you see this as an example in the Diamondbacks game?
Yes, I'm not calling that abuse. I'm just calling
Right.
that a difference in power.
Okay. And the difference in power, when there's a difference in power, when the person who has the less power in the relationship, do they always feel like they have a choice in choosing to say, no, I'm not going to spend the night with you?
No, they often don't feel that they have a choice
Why is that?
because they want something and they feel that they have to go kind of the extra mile to get it. And in some ways maybe feel like their back's against the wall about it, but they don't often feel like they have a choice because they want something and they're more focused on moving that relationship closer together than they are on looking at their at their ultimate choices.
Okay. And when you say they want something, are you talking about the relationship that they want?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's talk about August 2nd of 2007.
We're going to take the afternoon recess a little early. Please be back in the designated area at 2:35. Please remember the admonition. You are excused.
Please stand for the jury.
Record will show the jury has left the courtroom. You may step down. We are at recess. Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. You may continue.
Thank you, Honor. All right, we're just about to talk about a journal entry from August 2nd, 2007. Mark 69. Did you review this journal article prior to today?
Yes, I did.
All right. And can you give us the context or the impression that you get after reviewing the article from August 2nd, 2007?
That Miss Arias greatly loves Mr. Alexander, and that what she's relying on is the potential that she saw in him from the beginning, that his potential for greatness is there, and that she's sort of looking at that potential and hanging on to that as what could be present. So she's hoping that that's going to be true because she loves him, and she wishes she didn't love him, but that she does.
Does this speak at all to hopefulness?
It certainly does.
And did we talk about hopefulness in the beginning when you were talking about your continuum?
Yes, we did.
So when she's talking in this particular journal entry on August 2nd, is she talking about the hope of seeing something better?
She's absolutely talking about that, and she's doing what lots of people do, which is looking back at the very beginning of a relationship and seeing all the good things that happen, because a lot of good things happen at the beginning of relationships. And she's seeing that that's possible and feeling like it's going to be possible in the future.
Okay. Also in August of 2007, are you aware of when Miss Arias saw or caught Mr. Alexander making out with another woman?
Yes.
Can you tell us what you know of that?
She walked in, I believe, and saw him on the couch with another woman, and she left.
Okay. She immediately left his house?
I believe she did.
All right. Now, at the time in August of 2007, they had, as you put, allegedly broken up, right?
Right.
But based on your reading of her journal entries and reading really of the entire information with regard to this entire case, were they still carrying on with the relationship?
They were still carrying on as if they had a relationship, yes.
All right. So what happens after she leaves? Does she talk to him about it the next day?
She goes, she talks to him the next day. He gets very upset. He says he wants to effing.
Judge, may we approach? Okay, Ms. Laviolette. We were talking about what happens when she comes back the next day and how upset Mr. Alexander got. And when he got upset, did he threaten to commit suicide?
I'm not certain that he threatened to commit suicide at that point. I think he was disgusted with himself, and he made comments about that.
Okay. Well, and that's how I don't want to misword it. So he was upset based on the things that he was doing and how he was acting. Did Miss Arias explain to you that he seemed upset with himself?
He was very upset with himself.
All right. And you were saying that, and what is it that, so he wasn't threatening to commit suicide. What was he saying then?
Objection, hearsay.
Rephrase.
Was he talking about wanting to hurt himself?
He was, I believe, hitting his head in the wall.
Okay. All right. And was he hitting his head up against a door, banging it
Yes,
repeatedly?
yes,
All right. And did Miss Arias see this?
yes.
Okay. And when she goes upstairs to talk to him about this, after he's already now banging his head and clearly upset, what is her reaction to all of this?
Her reaction is to try to calm him down, to make him feel better, and to say, basically, and to,
I don't think you were going to actually quote her, were you?
no,
Okay.
I'm not
You may
quoting,
continue.
that it was okay to date other people, but she wanted to know about it. It was okay for him to have a girlfriend, but she would like him to tell her about that.
All right. And was she attempting to calm him down?
It appeared that she was, yes.
And does Miss Arias talk to you about empathy? And maybe
She's-
not in that word, I guess, but
She talks to me about feeling bad because he felt so bad, that he felt so bad that she wanted him to feel better.
okay. And is that something that you would characterize as empathy?
Yes, I would.
And is that something that happens in relationships that you've seen where one partner empathizes with the other?
It's a common practice in relationships, and in fact, it's a necessary part of relationships is for us to empathize and understand how the other person feels and to try to deal with how the other person feels and hopefully get it back.
And what happens when one partner is empathizing with another, like in this situation where Jodi's empathizing and trying to calm him down and tell him it's okay? What does that pull her back in? Is that any reason for her to continue to stay with him?
Empathy is an incredible pull for people to stay because you're explaining someone else's behavior in a way that you can make sense of it, and you're connecting with them on their pain based on knowing how you felt before. We used to say that women in the shelter oftentimes over-empathized because it was it was something that what you heard a lot was them understanding what it was like for their partners and being pulled back in because they understood what it was like and they felt for them.
Okay. All right, I want to talk to you about a journal entry from August 13th of 2007. And again, all these journal entries, and unless I say otherwise, are from Miss Arias' journal. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay, and this has been marked for exhibit as 570. Have you reviewed this article before?
yes. Yes, I have.
Okay. And what is the subject matter of this particular entry?
The subject matter is the suspicion, basically the suspicion of him when he acts kind, that she's starting to suspect, feel suspicious when he acts kind to her because the behavior that's happening is more harsh and cruel and critical and mean, and that what once was not common is now common. So that what she's seeing is that this behavior that was very unusual is becoming much more commonplace in the relationship.
And does she start out by saying that she received a nice text message from him?
Yes,
And is that what, when she's talking about something that he did that was nice, is that something that has become uncommon?
yes, that sort of triggered the other thoughts.
Okay. And is this, and she's, Does she talk about becoming numb to this type of, about the way she feels about him?
She talks about being numb. She talks about the relationship not being very good for her spiritually or emotionally. And she talks about the warning signs that she sees in the relationship as being basically big warning signs saying wrong way.
All right, and so even though she sees these warning signs and she's able to recognize that this relationship at this point is becoming not good for her emotionally or spiritually, is she ready to leave? Does she talk about that?
She's not ready to leave. She says that even though she thinks it's not going in the right direction, she thinks about the way things were. And the way things were pretty great for her, and she wants that back. And so that's where she is.
Okay.
She's not ready to leave.
All right. And is that something in your practice, do you find that that happens with women who ultimately are in abusive relationships where they may understand that this isn't good for them, but they're just not ready to do anything about it?
Yes, it's a common thing. You don't usually see people just leave a relationship and stay gone. They oftentimes will leave multiple times, or they won't even threaten to leave. They'll stay until they get to a place where something happens that they can't explain to themselves anymore, or they don't understand anymore, or where they believe somebody really wants them to hurt or really has an ill intention to them. And that's different for everybody that I've worked with. It's just a different thing. Every human being's different about what the bottom lines for them are.
And at this point in time, we're talking about August, the middle of August of 2007. So she would have spent about a year, almost a year with him. Is that about right? If they met in September of 2006?
Yes.
So over that year, in your review of things, they've certainly had some really good times, right?
Yes, they have.
And when a relationship experiences that, the really good times, and she's talking in this journal entry about wanting those good times back. Is that something that is bonding? Is that something that tends to keep people in the relationship?
Actually, it's called intermittent reinforcement or variable interval reinforcement. It's an old psych terminology, and it's basically that the hardest behavior to change is behavior that's rewarded in an inconsistent way. So that if, for instance, you know that every 3 times you press a bar, you're going to get a piece of candy, then you press it 3 times. But if you don't know when the candy's coming, you just keep pressing it because you think the candy's going to come sometime. Because it comes maybe the 10th time, and it comes maybe the 6th time, and maybe it comes the 20th time. And so you can actually have longer periods of time where people are still hoping that they're going to be reinforced or rewarded for doing the right thing.
So in that sense, then, women who stay in these types of abusive relationships are basically pushing that bar over and over again, hoping to get the reward back from their partner?
Yes.
All right. So, and what about the timing of this? This is August 13th of 2007, and she moved back to, or she not back, she didn't live in Mesa, but she moved to Mesa just in July. Is there anything that is important to you about the timing of when this, of how she is seeing these more harsh and cruel words coming from him?
Well, they didn't live in the same state for almost a year. And there seems to be an escalation, or what she's talking about is a gradual escalation from things being, okay or not, the harsh and critical and the put downs not being regular to all of a sudden they're regular. And she's only been living in the same town for about a month. And
so you said escalation. What do you mean?
Well, it seems that things are gradually getting worse, is what I mean.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about a journal entry from August 17th. I'm handing you what's been marked as Exhibit 571. And have you reviewed this prior to today?
Yes.
Okay. So on August 17th, can you give us the summary of the subject matter of what she's writing about?
Actually, she's writing about a sexual experience that they have and talking about a compliment that she was given by Mr. Alexander.
Okay. And the sexual experience that they have, did you also speak to Jodi about this in conjunction with reviewing the article?
Yes, I did.
And so do you know what the sexual experience it is?
Yes, it's the first time they have consensual vaginal sex.
Okay. And when she's talking about a compliment that Mr. Alexander gives her?
Yes,
And is it just particular to her body?
it is. It's talking about her body being built for sex.
Okay, I'm sorry, you said what?
That her body is built for sex, and that she takes that as quite a compliment because he thinks she's sexy.
Okay. And does she also then talk about after this sexual contact, does he leave?
I'm not sure that he leaves. I think he leaves,
Okay.
but I'm not certain. Oh, yes, he does leave. Yes, he leaves.
That she's reading from the documents.
Okay, after reviewing it, let me ask you again. After they have this sexual contact, does he leave?
Yes, he leaves.
Suspension, hearsay.
Overruled.
All right. And does she talk about her feelings that she has about this experience?
Yes. Basically,
Narrow scope of the question.
Listening.
What are her feelings?
basically that she doesn't feel ashamed or used or guilty, that she feels great because of the compliment.
And does she talk about feeling great physically and emotionally?
She talks about just feeling emotionally and physically great. She just feels good because she feels like she's gotten a compliment about who she is.
Okay. The fact that she brings up that she doesn't feel ashamed or guilty, does that mean anything to you?
Well, that she even mentions that she doesn't feel that way says to me that she must be thinking about that she ought to feel that way. It's called rationalization.
Okay, tell me what rationalization is.
Rationalization is sort of the most common defense mechanism that most of us use, and it's really about taking something that we've done that we don't like and explaining it to ourselves in a way that makes it viable for us, that we can live with ourselves for it. That it can be used to make our self-esteem feel better, reinforce our egos, but that basically it's something, for instance, you hear people talk about, well, I cheated on my taxes, but so does everybody else. So you make it something that is just, it's something that basically most human beings do. Probably I'd say all human beings, except you're not supposed to say all. But it's something that we do, and it's a way to live with ourselves when we do something that we don't feel real good about.
And so is that what you see here in this journal entry? Is that what she's doing?
Well, it looks like it to me.
Okay. And what do you know about having vaginal sex in their relationship, given their religion? Was that something that she, based on the religion, would have felt guilty for?
Yes, it is. Because that was the area that she set limits with. That was the area that she knew was the greatest sin. And that was the thing that she just did. So she's culpable.
What do you mean by culpable?
Well, I think that when you know you have crossed a line, you become part of that deception to a certain degree.
Okay. And in this instance, who did she cross the line with?
Mr. Alexander.
And Mr. Alexander, as far as spiritually speaking, who is he to her?
Her spiritual mentor.
So does that give her any ability to, when you talk about her being culpable, then she is wrapped up in something that they did that's considered a sin, right?
What I'm talking about is that she, I would think, probably feels culpable. Not that because she has now participated in the sin that is the biggest sin in terms of chastity, that they are now bound up in this basic lie together.
Okay. And when she's rationalizing and she talks about feeling great, does she talk about that? Does she talk about how she doesn't always feel great anymore? It's rare for her.
She does talk about not feeling good about herself on a regular basis.
Okay. And so by having this sexual contact with Mr. Alexander, does this seem to make her feel good?
Yes, it does.
And in this particular journal entry, is that based on the compliment and how he treated her at the time?
Yes.
Okay. Now, a couple of days after this occurs, did you speak to Miss Arias about whether or not she ever spoke to anyone else about this sexual contact that's going on?
Yes, I did.
All right. And did she speak to anybody else?
She spoke to her friend Rachel.
And did she tell Rachel everything that she and Mr. Alexander had done?
No, she didn't. She wanted to sort of test the waters, and so she told Rachel that they'd had oral sex.
And based on the conversation that she has with Rachel, is she encouraged to go talk to the bishop?
Rachel tells her she needs to go to the bishop right away, that both her and Mr. Alexander need to go to the bishop, that she's crossed lines and they need to get a consult from the bishop.
Okay. And does she go to speak to Mr. Alexander about it?
Yes, she does.
Ultimately, does Mr. Alexander agree to go?
No, he doesn't agree to go. He indicates that he's been in trouble for this before.
Sustained.
And so ultimately, does Mr. Alexander go to the bishop to see the bishop with Miss Arias?
No, he does not.
Does that do anything with regard to the fact of, you were talking a few minutes ago about culpable and being wrapped up in this, basically this lie or this deception of what they're doing. She reaches out to a friend who gives her advice, and then she ultimately doesn't take her up on the advice after speaking with Mr. Alexander. Does that do anything as far as their relationship and in isolating her or giving her people an outlet to express her frustrations or express her feelings?
Well, I think she probably knows that the person she felt safe with, which was Rachel, is somebody she can't talk to about this again. And it sort of binds them together in the deception, because there's a lot of talk from Mr. Alexander that he's a virgin. So there's a picture of who he is. And if she goes to the bishop, it ruins his reputation, and it doesn't do much for hers either.
In your experience with other couples, when you talk to the women, whether or not they would tell on their partner about abuse or emotional abuse or physical abuse, did you run into issues where the women didn't want to tell anybody because of their partner's reputation?
Frequently. Even when the partner didn't have a really good reputation, they were reluctant to talk, either by way of them losing a career, by way of them losing status in the community, by way of them being seen as less than. Most of the women I worked with were very cautious. In fact, and it didn't seem to matter if these were women who had a lot or didn't have a lot economically, if they were educated or not educated, if they were religious or not religious, that pretty much across the board, that they went out of their way to protect the person that they loved.
Even though that person might have been emotionally or physically abusive with them?
Yes.
And do you start to see that happening in this relationship here, where Miss Arias is restricted basically on who she can talk to about what's happening?
Yes, I think she's, her isolation, what they've got now is a secret, and the secret is between the two of them. And as they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's our secrets that oppress us. So when you've got a secret and the only person you share the secret with is the person that you've got the problem with. If you've got the problem, then you don't have anybody else. You pretty much don't feel that you have the ability to talk to a lot of other people about it.
Okay. And for right now, she's at least writing in her journal about things, right?
Yes,
Although in your review of things, in this particular journal article, or that of August 13th, does she ever actually say that they had vaginal sex?
no, she doesn't.
Okay. So when she's writing in her journal, is she being very detailed about the actual facts of what's going on?
No, she's not.
All right, I want to talk to you about a journal entry from August 26, 2007, and this is in evidence. It's Exhibit 510. And in the beginning, she writes that she's glad that nobody else reads this journal, right? Because she loves Travis Alexander.
Yes.
And with regard to this particular journal, does she talk about how she loves him, but then that it's not always what she wishes?
Yes. Clearly, she talks about having two very separate experiences with him, and one that he makes her sick and one that he makes her happy, one that he makes her sad, one that he makes her miserable, one where she feels uplifted, one where she feels and feels beautiful. So she's back and forth. She's got the best and the worst is what it seems like.
All right. And then does she talk about that does she say that all in all, I shouldn't be wording it as if he makes me feel those things, right?
Yes, that's part of the laws of attraction.
Okay.
As well.
And she goes on to say it all originates from within.
Yes.
So, and you said that's part of the law of attraction?
Yes, that she would have the power to, that she doesn't have to feel bad if she thinks in a more positive way. Okay. If she thinks more positively, if she acts more positively, that she'll feel more positively despite what's going on.
Okay. And she talks about all of her darkness as a result of her own creation. Is that also speaking to that she has the power to change Mr. Alexander?
She has the power to change her own life, which, I mean, if you extrapolate, could mean that she has the power to change Mr. Alexander, but definitely that if she thinks and feels differently, that she will think and feel differently.
Okay. And then from going to talking about how much she loves him, does she also talk about how sad she is?
She wishes she could die. So yes, she's feeling very bad. And I think that's, you know, the back and forth of feeling like she has a relationship that's very important to her, that she cares about, that she wants to work out. And on the other side, she feels terrible. And she can't really reconcile those two things very easily.
Okay. In this particular journal entry, do you see self-blame?
Sure.
And not just on this page, obviously, but the whole thing, what we're reviewing.
What she's talking about is being able to change things, and she's not doing it. So she blames herself for not doing it. She blames herself for not for not being, I guess, more effective in a sense.
Okay. And is she talking about that she's basically unable to get out of this relationship? She's not ready.
She's not ready to get out of the relationship. She's still tied to that relationship.
And is that unusual at all, given the fact that she's so down when she talks about suicide, that still doesn't make her ready to leave?
No, I have met with many, many women who absolutely are down, they're depressed, they're not functioning as well at work. In fact, I had a nurse that I worked with who was a psych nurse, and she was told she needed to get help because she was more depressed than the people in the locked unit, and that if she didn't get help, she would lose her job. And that's why she came for help, but she wasn't able And unless she was forced with that kind of situation, she was so down, she couldn't ask for help. And on the other side of it, the relationship was very abusive. And she was isolated. There were a whole series of things that happened in that relationship, but what eventually happened was she was isolated from her family. She was isolated from friends, that her only, resource basically was the person who was abusing her.
All right. So even when people feel that down, or like this journal entry talking about suicide, that, in your experience, has not been a reason to ultimately get the woman to leave the relationship?
No.
There's
It depends, but
Okay.
generally, if someone is not ready to leave, they're not ready to leave. And it doesn't matter what somebody else says, it's the state that they're in. It's what they believe. It's what they feel.
And I think that you talked to us a little bit about it doesn't matter what somebody else believes or thinks. So in other words, when someone is feeling this way about their relationship, and this push and pull of the relationship, a lot of times do they not express that to their friends or family because they think that they know that they're going to say, well, leave, and they're not ready to do it?
If you have supportive friends and family, a lot of times your supportive friends and family want you to take an action you're not ready to take. And so and the other part is, you don't want your friends and family to think that the person that you're with isn't a good person. You don't want your friends and family to think you have bad taste. You want people to spend time with, so you tend to minimize and deny what's going on.
Okay. Also, at the end of this article, does she talk about staying at Rachel's, and that if Travis found out, he'd get upset?
Yes, because Mr. Alexander doesn't like Rachel.
And is that based on the conversation about going to the bishop?
I am not sure, but I would suspect that would have something to do.
All right. Based on the timing of this journal entry, it's at the end of August, right? August 26th?
Yes.
All right. And we know that they had the first consensual vaginal sex on August 17th. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And sometime after August 17th is when Miss Arias spoke with Rachel about going to the bishop?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I want to talk to you about an email on September 11th of 2007. May I approach?
Okay.
Handing you what's been marked as Exhibit 572. And is this an email from Mr. Alexander?
Yes, it is.
And is this to a woman named Matilda Edvinson?
Yes, it is.
All right, and the subject matter of this email, what is it?
About pictures that he would like her to send him.
Okay, and these pictures, are they for business, or can you get a sense from reading the email what the pictures are for?
He wants to drool over them all day.
Sustained.
They are sexy pictures, not naked pictures.
Okay, and do you have a copy of the pictures that she sends?
Yes, I do.
All right, and this is sent September 11th, 2007, right?
Yes.
And at that time, based on what you know about the case, obviously Mr. Alexander was in an alleged relationship, allegedly broken up, but still carrying on a relationship with Miss Arias, right?
Yes.
And at this time, was he also in a relationship with someone named Lisa Andrews?
Yes, he was.
And so based on this email to another woman, is there anything significant about it to you?
Well, that he's able to manage not being truthful to several women at a time.
In speaking with Miss Arias, did she have any idea that he was emailing other women, asking for pictures of them?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Or I guess I should ask, did she have any specific knowledge as to this particular woman?
No, she did not.
All right. And what else about this email is important, if anything?
Just that, that there's, at this point, Jodi Arias, Lisa Andrews, who are in relationship, active relationship with Mr. Alexander, and that he's also trying to encourage another relationship with someone else at the same time.
Does that speak to infidelity at all?
Well, it certainly speaks to infidelity. It also speaks to
Suggestion, speculation.
Approach.
You may continue.
All right. So with regard to infidelity, when somebody is chronically, and I'm not speaking of Mr. Alexander, but when somebody is chronically, when there's chronic infidelity, is that a form of abuse?
that's
Overruled.
it's considered a form of psychological abuse if someone is chronically unfaithful.
Okay. And it's psychological abuse, you said?
Yes,
Why is that?
because the partner who's involved in that situation is living in fear of relationship ending, is generally not getting the same amount of attention as they did. They may be dealing with the guilt of the person who's chronically unfaithful. And what we've seen with people who are guilty in a chronic way is that guilt can light the fuse to anger.
What do you mean by that?
If you feel guilty, and this is what I've seen over the years with a number of the men in my group, that when they feel guilty and they're faced with looking at the pain in somebody's eyes or the reaction of their partner, that they get angry because it doesn't feel good to feel guilty. And so if I'm externalizing the blame, I'm going to blame you for making me feel guilty. And I hear that sort of over and over again, which is, you've got me on a guilt trip. And what I will ask them is, are they still doing the things they feel guilty about? And most often they say yes. And I say, well, to get off the guilt trip, you have to stop doing what you feel guilty about. It's not that other person, although they can trigger it. It's that you continue to do the things you feel guilty about.
And so when feeling guilty, you say triggers anger, is that, do you tend to see escalation in either psychological, emotional, or physical abuse?
Yes, you can.
Okay. All right. I want to talk to you about September 13th, which is a journal entry. And I'm going to show you from the actual journal, which is exhibit number 242.001. September 13th of 2007. Can you review that for a moment? Or do you need to review that?
I haven't seen this. So,
Oh, did you lose the page? Oh, it's marked, I think. With the black.
okay.
Not with the blue.
It's,
September 13th you have?
Oh, okay.
I think there's a black ribbon that goes through the
Oh, all right.
diary.
This is September 9th.
Okay, so go forward. I'm looking for September 13th.
All right.
All right, and it's a journal entry where they talk about going to have a supai, where Miss Arias talks about going to have a supai. Do you need to review that for a second?
Well, I know about this incident, I just hadn't seen the journal
Okay.
itself.
You've seen a photocopy of it, you mean?
Yes,
Okay. Do you need to review it anymore, or are you good?
I think I'm pretty good. Depends on how detailed you get.
All right. Well, let us know if you need to look at it.
Okay.
All right. So this particular journal entry on September 13th, are you aware of a trip that Jodi takes with Mr. Alexander and Daniel and Desiree Freeman?
Yes,
All right. And is it the four of them on this trip?
yes, it is.
And does Miss Arias talk in her journal entry about a negative impact or something happening at the beginning of the trip?
She says that basically,
Overruled, you may answer. Yes or no?
yes,
All right. And what does she say? What's your takeaway from the reading the journal?
Approach, please. May continue.
All right. And besides reviewing the journal entry, did you also speak with Miss Arias about this particular trip?
yes, I did.
All right. And what is significant to you about this trip that they have to have a supai?
That,
That's just reading Exhibit 44001.
I don't think she is.
Right, you may answer without referring to the exhibit.
all right. That basically there was an explosion that Mr. Alexander exploded at her and that she felt quite devastated by it, but that later on he apologized, which was not all that common, and how much it meant to her that he took responsibility for 90% of what happened that day.
All right. And in this particular event, do we see any type of a cycle?
Well, you see that there's a tension that happened at the beginning of the day when they were doing their hike, and then an episode where he explodes, and then an apology, which is kind of that loving respite period where he's sorry that things happened, and he's actually taking responsibility for it.
And how does that make her feel? The fact that he apologizes and takes responsibility for the argument?
Makes her feel very good. That it's different than he's showing her, that he's taking responsibility, and that doesn't often happen, and that helps the rest of the time.
All right. And does that help for her to reconcile the argument that she has with him? In other words, to keep going, to stay on the trip and stay in the relationship?
Well, they definitely stay on the trip, and they definitely stay in the relationship. So I would say you could go there.
All right. based on your review of the journal entry, does it become apparent to you that she's feeling worse about herself?
I haven't finished reading this journal entry.
Okay, do you want to go ahead and review it?
Sure. It doesn't sound like she's feeling worse about herself. It sounds like she's continuing to think in a positive way and that she wants things to work out. And she's with people that she cares about. She cares a lot about the Freemans, and they're all together, and she's feeling gratitude, and she wants to maintain that gratitude.
Okay. And in maintaining that gratitude, is she trying to maintain those good feelings about the relationship?
Sure.
In the beginning of the journal entry, when she talks about the incident, the fight that they have, is she talking about how it impacted her the entire day?
She said that it
Objection, hearsay,
yes.
yes,
All right. So did it impact her the entire day?
Yes.
All right. Does she talk about how she feels on the inside? In other words, how she carries herself on the outside versus how she feels on the inside?
Not in this particular entry, no.
No? Okay. All right. Then let's move on to, well, let me ask you this. This particular trip to Havasupai, you said it was just the four of them, right?
Yes.
And the, do you learn anything about Mr. Alexander's behavior from reading an interview with Desiree Freeman?
Yes, I did.
What did you learn?
She describes Mr. Alexander as clingy with Miss Arias during this trip.
Okay. And during this trip in September of 2007, are you also aware that he is in a relationship with Lisa Andrews at this time?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Let's talk about September 23rd. This has been marked as Exhibit 573. Let me know if you need time to review it.
No.
And you've obviously reviewed this before, right?
Yes, I have.
All right. So with regard to September 23rd, this is a journal entry where with Miss Arias writing in her journal, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And what is the context or the subject matter of this entry?
A lot of self-blame, that she's contemplating suicide, that she does not like what her life has become, that she's pathetic, that kind of thing. She goes on about that. She goes on about being heartsick.
All right. And you talk about self-blame. Is she blaming herself for her situation?
She's looking at where her life was before and saying that if she could go back a number of years, that she would, but that she can't. And then she pumps herself back up and says, but I know I can make things better or worse during the next 5 years. And so she's going back with that laws of attraction. And she talks about her lack of discipline. She calls herself a ridiculous lack of discipline.
So when she talks about a ridiculous lack of discipline, the relationship that she's in, is this because it's her own fault? Is that what she's saying?
She's basically saying that a lot of how she feels and the fact that she's suicidal is her own fault.
Okay. And then does she, when you said she pumps herself back up, what is she trying to do? Is that fitting into the laws of attraction?
That's that she can move forward and that she has control about what happens with her life when she moves forward. That she can make the next 5 years magnificent, or she can make them terrible, or she can make them wonderful, or she can make them ugly. So she's talking about her own ability to create, sort of what she puts out there.
All right. And is she taking into account at all about the ability of changing someone else to make that happen?
She doesn't seem to be doing that. She seems to be believing that if she only does it right, that her life will be better.
Is that significant to you in this, when you're looking at the progression of this relationship?
Well, it's significant in the ways I've discussed before, which is that her belief in this law of attraction and the reality of her life are sort of, bumping heads. And it keeps her, I think, kind of confused and unable to move. She's kind of stuck because she keeps believing that whether or not Mr. Alexander changes, she can change things.
All right. And so that keeps her stuck? Is
Yes.
that a yes? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Did you review an email from Lisa Andrews to Travis Alexander?
Yes, I did.
And was that written September 2007?
September 23rd, 2007. Yes, it was.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 385. Let me know if you need to review it.
Right.
All right. In this particular email, this is from obviously another woman, from Lisa Andrews. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
And based on the context of the email, is it your understanding that Miss Andrews is currently involved in a relationship with Mr. Alexander in September of 2007?
Yes.
And in September of 2007, is she writing him basically a list of complaints and feelings that she has about their relationship?
Yes, she is.
Based on your impressions of this email, what is it that you get out of this email from your own impressions?
That she believes that they have gotten too sexual too soon, talks about making out.
And you're talking about Lisa Andrews and Mr. Alexander.
Right.
Okay.
That she feels that he has basically pushed on her, talked about sex a lot in a way that she doesn't appreciate, that she wants him to stop grabbing her butt, particularly in public, and that he has ignored that and continues to do that, that he talks sexually to her in a way that she feels uncomfortable with and wants him to stop, which he doesn't, that she finds that unattractive and doesn't appreciate it, that her values don't seem to be important to him, that he's always needing compliments, in fact, that it's very hard to give him compliments because he wants them so often. And I think one of the other things that is important is that he kind of makes a dig at her. She feels that he's uncaring and that she wants to be a teacher. And she's very proud of wanting to be a teacher. And on the one hand, he tells her that being a teacher is, that she'd be good at it. And on the other hand, that if that's what she wants to do with her life, it sucks.
So is that one of those examples you were telling us about earlier, the subtle emotional or subtle psychological abuse type thing where somebody says something that is kind of a compliment but then takes it right back and that type of thing?
Not only takes it back, but makes it something derogatory. And so that's in there. And the other, she alleges to the fact that he hasn't had sex yet and that she knows he wants it, that there's a lot of sexual tension that is part of his life on a regular basis, and that he just needs to be patient because basically someday he'll get to have sex too.
Based on your reading of this email, does it become clear that Miss Andrews believes that he was a virgin?
Yes.
Based on what you know from Miss Arias, was that true?
No, it was not true.
In your review of other documents on the case, did you learn what the age difference was between Miss Andrews and Mr. Alexander?
There was a 10, almost 11-year age difference between the two of them.
All right. And what about this email then is important to you with regard to Jodi and Mr. Alexander's relationship?
One of the things that is talked about in this email is that she didn't know that Jodi was going on the trip. She talks, there's a discussion about him being overly negative about the trip and that she had no idea he was going with Miss Arias, but that she was upset that she didn't know that, but that she believed that he must be giving Miss Arias some encouragement because women don't hang around if they don't get encouragement. So she was distrusting what he was telling her about this. And so that was part of the discussion that went on in this email. And later she says that they talked.
Hearsay.
Based on your impression of the email, I guess, right? Is that what you're about to say?
Right.
Okay.
That she felt better.
Objection, speculation, hearsay.
Sustained, rephrase.
Well, based on the impression of the email and the contents of the email, do you have an understanding as to whether or not Miss Andrews felt any better?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled, you may answer yes or no.
Yes.
Okay, and what was that?
That she felt better because they spoke with each other.
Hearsay.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, she felt better because why?
She felt better because they had a conversation, and after the conversation, which I'm not sure what was said during the conversation, but because of the conversation, she felt better.
Okay. Do you see any patterns of behavior emerging between the way that Mr. Alexander treated Miss Arias versus the way that Mr. Alexander and Miss Andrews, their similarities in their relationship?
Yes.
What do you see?
I see an aggressive sexuality that's there with two women who are vulnerable, one who is a lot younger, one who is vulnerable just coming out of a relationship. I see a possessiveness where he, in public is physically affectionate and refuses to listen when someone is saying, this is not, I don't want this to happen. That he has, in both these cases, put these women down, but then sort of backs off of it.
And can we talk about, at some point, are you aware of whether or not Mr. Alexander ever referred to Miss Arias as a skink?
Yes.
But then turns it around
Yes.
and tries to say that it's a joke?
Yes.
All right, and you know that based on the emails that go back and forth between the Hugheses and Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I do.
And so is that something similar that you see with regard to his teacher comment?
Yes, it is something similar.
Okay, and is that because he's putting them down but then saying, oh, no, you misunderstood me type of thing?
Objection.
Overall. He's not even pulling them back.
Okay,
He's pulled back the skank comment with Miss Arias, but he hasn't pulled back the comment about Miss Andrews choosing to teach and saying that that would suck, basically.
Okay. Do you see, what about the compliments? That Miss Andrews says that Mr. Alexander, something about needing compliments all the time. Do you see similarities between that and the way that things happened with Miss Arias?
Well, Miss Arias says in her journal, or there's a discussion in the journal about as long as things are positive, and she keeps things positive with Mr. Alexander, that things are good. And there's a basic, it feels, my interpretation, a basic neediness from somebody who's asking for compliments all the time. And then the discussion with Miss Andrews is that he doesn't give them back, that he doesn't compliment her, but he wants them all the time, and it becomes very difficult for her to give him compliments.
And incidentally, in your review of the case, are you aware of other women who have said the same thing, that Mr. Alexander is constantly in need of compliments from these other women?
Yes.
All right. What about, do you see any type of deception going on at this point?
Yes, I see deception going on.
What kind of deception?
There's a belief by Miss Andrews that he is faithful to her, and I'm not sure about what Miss Arias believes at this point, but I believe she knows something about the relationship, but I'm not certain.
All right, let me ask you about Miss Arias, though. Did she, based on your conversations with her, did she ever feel like she could go and date other people, or certainly have a full-on relationship with another man while she's in this quasi-relationship with Mr. Alexander?
No, she didn't.
Okay, so the deception you see is from the fact that with regard to Miss Andrews?
I see deception in a lot of areas, that there's deception about being a virgin. So there's a belief in the community that he's a virgin. Miss Andrews is part of that community. There's a belief in the community that he's a virgin, and he perpetuates that belief. There's a belief that he's financially successful, and he perpetuates that belief, and there's not a lot of evidence to say that he is. He's deceptive about what he's done sexually. So there's deception about who he is. There's deception about relationships with other women. So where he's emailing.
Did you review other text messages and emails from other women and Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so based on those, what is it that you see? She's,
Approach, please.
Ms. Laviolette, when you talk about deception with regard to deceiving other women, do you know who these women are, the names, I mean?
I know the names of many of the women.
Okay, go ahead, tell me what they are.
Chriselle, Reagan, Nicole, Denise,
Shaitanya?
Maria, I believe probably Deanna, Jodi, Lisa,
All right. And this email that we just went through, Matilda?
Matilda.
Okay. Based on, are there conversations going on with all of these women at some point?
Yes, there are, and Krista is another one.
Okay. And when you talk about deception, what do you mean?
I mean that it doesn't appear that these women are aware of each other, so that he is able to lead a life of deception and somehow reconcile that with his own faith and his own behavior, that he is somehow able to pull that together and compartmentalize his life so that he can have these relationships with all these different women.
Sustained.
All right, well, we'll get to some of those text messages a little bit later. Let's talk about September 27th. And this is just a journal entry on September 27th from Miss Arias. And she writes a gratitude list. Did you see those in her journal entries?
Yes, I did.
And just generally speaking, this is exhibit, it's been marked as 574. But about her journal entries, did you see where she writes the gratitude list?
Yes, I did.
And what is it? What were those about?
She was writing about 5 things she was grateful for. She decided to do that as a way to make herself feel better, to start the day.
Overruled.
And her number one, the number one item on her gratitude list was Mr. Alexander.
Sustained.
All right. With regard to this journal entry, does she make a gratitude list?
Yes, she does.
And when she's talking about gratitude, she's being thankful for what she has in her life. Is that right?
Yes, she is.
All right. And does she put Travis Alexander on this list?
Yes, she does.
And where?
Overruled.
Number 1.
All right. Does that speak to what she was feeling about him at that time?
Certainly.
Okay.
She's most grateful for him.
All right. And so are you seeing where she's having like loving feelings towards him?
She's most grateful for him, so if I go a step further, I would say that it's because of loving feelings.
Okay. So when we're talking about the relationship in September of 2007, and I know we talked about this horrible fight in Havasu and things like that, ultimately, though, is she still having this struggle where there are some good days where she keeps hoping for and then bad days?
Yes, there are absolutely good days and bad days.
Okay. And is that important to you?
It's important to me in that when somebody is looking at the good days and the bad days, until they get to a place where the bad days weigh more, even if they're about equal, the good days weigh more. And so you kind of put in perspective what you've got, and this perspective is, there's more good than bad in this relationship. And when we feel connected, I feel very connected, and so I'm still there.
Okay. As part of your review of this case, did you review emails between Mr. Alexander and a person named Deanna Reed?
Yes, I did.
And was there ever any emails that you reviewed where Miss Reed was asking him to pay her back?
Yes.
Approach. Okay, 5-minute recess. Please go back to the jury room. We will call you back shortly.
Please stand for the jury.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and counsel. You may continue.
Thank you, Honor. Ms. Laviolette, did you review an email that was written October 3rd of 2007?
I bet I did.
Okay. Did you review an email that had to do with Mr. Alexander owing somebody money?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And that was besides the email that we've already discussed with Ms. Hughes, right?
Excuse me?
This was in addition to the email that we've already discussed regarding the money that he owed to Ms. Hughes.
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. I want to talk to you about a journal entry on October 6th of 2007 It's been marked as 576. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. So on October 6th, this is a journal entry from Miss Arias, right, into her own journal.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And what is it, the subject matter of this journal entry?
She's, the subject matter is Deanna Reed and Travis's, Mr. Alexander's impression that she's become like Deanna Reed.
Okay,
That-
I'm sorry, let me stop you there. So we
Okay.
maybe let's back up a second.
Okay.
Based on your review of this case, do you know who Deanna Reed is?
Deanna Reed was the woman who Mr. Alexander was in love with and had a relationship with for, I believe, 7 years.
Okay. And was he still in contact with her while he was in a relationship with Miss Arias?
Yes, he was.
And was he still in contact with her when he was in a relationship with Miss Andrews?
Yes, he was.
And was he still in contact with her when these other women that you mentioned with regard to the text messages and emails that you reviewed, was he still in contact with Miss Reed as well?
Yes, he was.
All right. And based on your conversations with Miss Arias, what did she believe about Miss Reed as far as how Miss Reed treated Mr. Alexander?
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled. You may answer.
Miss Arias believed that Deanna Reed was a little crazy and maybe, well, that she was crazy and jealous.
All right. And did Mr. Alexander often have Miss Arias not come into the home or drop him off around a corner to avoid seeing Miss Reed?
Objection, on violation of meeting.
Overruled, you may answer yes or no.
Yes.
All right. And is this information, did Miss Arias ever have any substantial conversations with Miss Reed?
Not that I'm aware of.
So where did this information come from?
From Mr. Alexander.
All right. And so back to this October 6th journal entry, you said that Mr. Alexander seems to be comparing Miss Arias to Miss Reed?
Yes.
And this is what Jodi is writing in her journal, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Does she explain why Mr. Alexander feels that way?
She is talking.
Sustained.
Is that how and why does she explain Mr. Alexander feeling this way?
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled.
She says that he believes that he has to hide relationships from her in the way he hid relationships from Miss Reed.
Okay. And now we're in October of 2007, so they've had their official breakup in June, right?
Yes.
But in your review of the conversations that they have and the contact they have, does it appear like they're still having a relationship?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And what does Miss Arias think about being compared to Miss Reed?
She thinks it's ridiculous that
Okay.
she's not like Miss Reed, and that he's delusional if he thinks that. Actually, on crack is, I think, the wording.
All right. And in your review of her journal entries, you said that Miss Reed was characterized as being jealous.
I believe that's what Miss Arias told me, jealous, crazy, that she was a crazy,
Okay.
kind of crazy.
All right. And in reviewing the journal entries, did you see any notions of jealousy coming from Jodi?
No, I didn't.
And did you see notions of jealousy coming from Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And have we talked about some of those issues already?
Yes, we have. We've talked about them.
All right. Let's talk about just a few days later. Actually, just the next day on October 7th. Are you aware, do you remember reading a journal article where, and I believe it's actually in the same exhibit, where she talks about motherhood?
Yes.
And what is the context, or what is your impression of her thoughts and feelings about motherhood?
She is attending a talk on motherhood, and she's talking about the importance for her of being the matriarch in a family, of being a good mother, of being a good wife, and that this was a really, this was at the forefront of what she wanted in her life, to be a mother and a wife, and to be a spiritual matriarch in the family.
All right. And in speaking with Miss Arias, is this something that, was she starting to feel like she wasn't going to get this from Mr. Alexander?
Yes, she was feeling that way.
Okay, and so by October of 2007, do we have her starting to feel like the relationship with Mr. Alexander is not going to end up in marriage?
Well, that's back and forth, because although she says that, the behavior lends me to believe that there's still hope that that could happen.
All right, so is she going through this learned hopefulness?
I believe she is, yes.
All right, so is she still, when you talk about this back and forth behavior, is that something that you see in your practice, this back and forth behavior between feeling like, okay, it can work, and then, oh, and it's not going to work?
Absolutely, it's very common.
All right. Let's talk about October 13th, journal entry on October 13th, and this has been marked as Exhibit 577. And I believe around this time, are you aware of them taking a trip?
Yes.
All right. Do you need to review that?
I'm not reviewing the entire email, but I know the gist of the email.
And when you say email, do you mean journal entry?
I'm sorry, the journal.
Okay. All right. So where is it that they go on a trip in October?
They go to a balloon festival in Albuquerque.
All right. And during this time, are you aware that whether or not Mr. Alexander is still dating Lisa Andrews?
I believe he is still dating.
Sustained.
Based on your information that you reviewed in the case, are you do you have the understanding that they were still dating?
I do.
Okay. And yet it's Mr. Alexander who takes Jodi with him to this balloon festival, right?
Yes.
And we talked earlier about when they go on trips together and how it's very bonding for them. Do you see that type of bonding going on with this trip?
Yes. There's talk about trying new foods, trying alligator. I forget what else they're trying. Frog's legs. They're trying new food, and that it's a good trip.
All right. Is this you talked earlier about? I think it's called variable interval reinforcement.
Yes.
Is this something that you see here?
Yes.
Okay. Why?
Because you never know when the good things are going to happen, but they happen, and they're good things. And so there's something to look forward to. There's something to believe. If I stick with this, I can have what I want. I can eventually have what I want. And so when you bond, when you take these trips, and when you share special things, and I think they do. I think in this relationship, they do share special things. I think that's what keeps people in a relationship, is that they share special things, and those things are hard to give up.
All right. And is this one of those special times that you see based on her journal entries?
Yes.
And in speaking with her as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. As part of your review, you also talked about other emails between Lisa Andrews and Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
And did you review one in October where Mr. Alexander is reassuring Lisa that issues have been dealt with?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I don't remember the exact date, but I remember that
Objection, hearsay.
Approach, please. May continue.
Okay, so with regard to this email, not talking about the specifics of it, but in this email from Mr. Alexander to Miss Andrews, do you see him reassuring her that everything is okay?
Yes, and that he's dealt with Jodi. He's dealt with the Jodi issue.
We talked about it.
Sustained.
Okay.
And I'll ask that be stricken.
The jury is directed to disregard the last response. It is stricken from the record.
Okay. So in other words, so is he do you see this, have you seen Mr. Alexander doing such a thing before in other relationships or with other women, this reassuring? When somebody's upset or somebody's suspicious of his actions, do you see him doing this reassuring?
Just recommendation, date and time, women.
Yes or no?
Yes,
Okay. And so is this one more time that you see it?
yes.
Okay. What about this incident is important to you?
That shortly after they come back from a trip, Mr. Alexander and Jodi Arias come back from this trip where they've had a really good time and they've bonded with each other, that he is reaffirming a relationship with another woman and saying that he's dealt with the Jodi issue. I'm sorry.
Not that part.
Okay. And that basically the one woman has nothing to worry about.
Do you find this to be deceptive at all?
I find it to be very deceptive.
And what about manipulative?
Well, it's manipulative in that when you lie to somebody who cares about you and they believe you, it reinforces them to believe what you say.
And do you see this happening and to reinforce the relationship so that the woman stays?
Excuse me?
Do you see this happening so that it reinforces the relationship so that the woman stays in the relationship?
Yes, yes. Our minds don't tend to go where our minds haven't been. So if we are not people who generally lie, we generally believe people tell the truth. And so when someone we love and trust tells us something, we tend to believe it unless we are also tend to lie about things.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about at the end of October. I believe that is, let's see, towards the end of October, do we see the first incident of physical violence?
Yes, we do.
All right. And did you speak with Miss Arias about this?
Yes, I did.
All right. Can you tell us about what happens?
There's an argument about everything, about clothes, about how Miss Arias dresses, about her friendships, about her jobs. And there's Mr. Alexander grabs her by the shoulders and shakes her. She wants to leave. He says, "You're not leaving." He pushes her. She falls to her knees. And he berates her in a verbal way as well. And this goes on for a while. They continue to talk after this, and the relationship, I mean, there's...
They continue
sort
to
of-
talk till it calms down?
Yes,
Okay. And this happens over a period of a couple hours?
yes.
One of the things that Miss Arias specifically recalled with regard to this argument had to do with her family. Do you remember that?
That according to Miss Arias, that Mr. Alexander called her family names, called her grandfather, that she was talking about her brother, and his name was Carl, and basically said that was a gay name. And she said, "Well, it's my grandfather's name." And he said, he was probably a fag too. And that there was the putting down of her family.
Is that significant to you?
Yes, it's significant, first of all, that somebody calls names to somebody's family, and that he calls them gay names. I mean, I'm not sure why that was. But the putting down of somebody's family is significant. Putting down of people that you care about is significant.
All right. And what about her not being able to leave? What does she say about that?
Well, in Dr. DeMarte's report, she says she could have left. But initially, he tells her he can't leave, or that she can't leave. And I don't know that she really tried to leave. She stayed. He was escalating. He was yelling at her. And she stayed and calmed him down.
Now, is that something
Then
you-
she got to leave.
Okay, after she calmed him down.
Right.
This fighting and this berating that goes on, and then she stays and ultimately stays till he calms down. Is this a cycle, or is this a pattern that you see in relationships in your own with your own patients?
Yes, it is.
Tell me about that.
Well, the pattern being that they have some kind of intense exchange that could be verbal, it could be psychological, it could be physical, it could be all of the above, and that after that happens, there's this quiet period. There's usually a period where people make up. It's called the loving respite. Lenore Walker calls it the honeymoon phase, where they bond again. Because and this happens in arguments with, with folks that aren't abusive. Usually, if you have an argument with somebody you love and you make up, you feel closer to that person because you've gone through something together and you've found a way to patch it up, and so you make up. In a domestically abusive relationship, it's even more intense because the event tends to be more intense.
The event, the tension part, you mean?
The incident.
The incident tends to be more intense.
Yeah.
All right, and in this particular incident, he actually pushes her down. Is that
Yes.
part of the physical violence of it?
Yes.
And we talked earlier about how sometimes women in these relationships don't feel like they have a choice. We talked about the power differential. I think we were talking about the Diamondbacks game, and it doesn't feel like a choice to make a choice, I guess. Is that something similar to this situation where ultimately she tried to fight her way out? Maybe she could have gotten out versus feeling like she didn't have a choice to leave with someone like that?
It could be a situation like that. I mean, when someone physically restrains you, you usually don't have much of a choice. So it's not just a matter of feeling like you don't have a choice. It's more a reality that you don't have a choice. And at some point, she may have had a choice, and she didn't act out on that choice.
And when somebody physically restrains you or is physically violent with you, do people tend to fear that if you do something that the person doesn't like, they might do it right again?
Yes.
Does Miss Arias tend to think that this might have been an when it happens in October of 2007, does Miss Arias tend to think that this is an isolated incident?
Yes, she says that it's an isolated instance.
Okay. What does that mean to you?
Well, in terms of the physical encounter, it's the first one. So she sees this as aberrant, as unusual, as not something that typifies the relationship. The verbal things, those are things that she's described as becoming more common and becoming things she expects. But the physical was not something she expected and saw it as an unusual act and maybe didn't even see that it would happen again, probably didn't see that it would happen again. And Mr. Alexander may not have seen that it would happen again either.
All right. And is that part of the hope that the ability on Mr. Alexander's part to hope that he doesn't do something like this again, and the ability to hope by Miss Arias that he's not going to do it again?
Yes.
All right. And all right, let's talk about a journal entry in October 26, 2007. And is it your understanding that this journal entry is after this physical incident?
Yes.
Okay. This has been marked as Exhibit 578. All right, do you remember reviewing this this journal entry prior to today?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and what is the context? What is it that you get out of this, your impressions of this journal entry?
That Jodi is thinking that she may be starting to get over Mr. Alexander, that she thinks she may have learned something, that she's kind of quick to fall in love and slow to fall out of love. But because of the way he treats her, because of the things he says and does, that she believes she's starting to lose attraction for him.
Okay, so in October of 2007, do you start to see an inkling, I guess you'd say, of her starting to pull away?
An inkling. An inkling is where she's actually starting to say to herself, I'm starting to get over him and it's about time.
Okay, and at the end of the journal entry, does she talk about who she's become?
She talks about becoming a shadow of what she once was, that she saw herself as a much healthier, much more directed person. She doesn't say those words, but that she indicates now that she's not what she used to be, and she's a shadow of what she once was, less than she once was.
All right, and based on the timing of this journal entry, is this about a little over a year into their relationship?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Probably.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow morning, 9:30 a.m., please remember the admonition. Have a nice evening. You are excused.